Hello everyone, welcome back to the Exotic Armor Vibe Check. This time we are taking a look at a bunch of Hunter adjustments. As always, this will not be a build showcase with each of these exotics, more just taking a look at what's been buffed, what's been redone, what's been reworked, and seeing how it fits and where it fits into the current sandbox. Before we see what has changed with the exotics, let's take a look at some baseline Hunter changes that came with Edge of Fate. Stylish Executioner, PvE melee damage bonus increased from 200 to 300%. It now works with glaive melee at full effect, and now works with every melee ability if the ability makes contact while you are leaving invisibility. And projectile melee abilities like Threaded Spike will benefit from the damage increase if you use it point blank. Facet of Courage, PvE melee damage bonus increased from 10 to 50%. Spark of Feedback, PvE melee damage bonus increased from 75% to 100%. Now works with the glaive melee at full effect, and the PvE melee damage bonus is no longer decreased when used with Syntheseps, Liar's Handshake, Knockout, Wormgod Caress, 1-2 Punch, Winter's Guile. That's more of a kind of like everybody know. That's not even Hunter specifically. Combination Blow. Maximum PvE damage bonus increased from 309 to 400%. Increased melee damage now works with melee glaive in full effect. Now works with Ascension in PvE full effect. And now works with grapple melee in PvE full effect. Do you see why everyone's running grapple Ascension right now? To complement these changes, the Hunter exotics based around melee kits have gone through a handful of buffs. Athrys' Embrace now does 300% PvE weighted throwing knife damage, up from 200%. No PvP changes, though. Now, is this, popping off for throwing knife? Because you would think, like, maybe not really, but you would actually be surprised at just how effective Athrys' Embrace can now be. Looking at some community insight from light.gg, prior to the stat change, it was determined that Athrys' Embrace grants 50 strength when strengthened heavy knife is active. Assuming that boost remains the same, it's a pretty sizable stat bonus to help boost knife damage even higher. On some orange bar Cabal using a weighted throwing knife with no additional bonuses, we crit for 713 to kill and refund our knife. When we add in Cauterized Darkness from the artifact, we get 927. When tested with Year-Tide Apex, it took 5 precision shots to trigger Strengthened Heavy Knife, which turned our knife crit from 713 to 3,228. With Cauterized, it goes up to 4,196, pretty impressive. 5,223 when we add in 1-2 Punch on a shotgun. So, does that move the needle for weighted throwing knife? I would say so, sorta. In a real-world example, doing K1 at minus 30, performed fine. Wasn't anything, too crazy, but for a new player or someone who really likes throwing knives and making explosions happen, you're gonna have a pretty good time as long as you can stay active. Pretty good reward for a high risk here. Missing your knife kills is gonna have a very, very significant impact on your damage being online, right? You're also gonna want to try to build up scorch stacks on your target to take advantage of the knife, exploding. Next, Ophidia Spathe's maximum PvE throwing knife damage bonus increased from 100 to 200%. Ophidia is where you get more knives to throw, and consecutive knives give a stacking damage bonus to those knives. The timing on the follow-up knives for the bonus damage is relatively short. It's about 5 seconds, and so you basically just want to toss out your knives really quick, and then you dodge to refresh them with Gambler's Dodge, and then you just kind of keep that chain rolling as much as you can. I don't know, it just kind of feels like this effect has been power crept by a lot of other things. Like, sure, you can spread some Scorch around and do some ignitions, and you got a knife trick on Prismatic for, like, flinging a bunch of knives and stuff, but I just don't really see too many places, unless you're a very big knife enthusiast, where you're going to want to have this over most other effects in the game in general, and there's just also other things that I feel like you can do with throwing knives. Liar's Handshake, and by extension Spirit of the Liar on the Hunter exotic class item, have had their PvE basic and arc melee damage increase from 200 to 400%. This change helps put the base arc subclass back into the conversation a little bit, but Prismatic Hunter is just so juiced right now. Their kit is crazy, and I just don't know how many people are really going to be running arc, although it's certainly not bad. Hunters have an insane grapple plus melee combination blow setup right now, if you haven't managed to hear of it already, through stat stacking and a few different exotic options. You can put up some ridiculously insane damage numbers. I'm going to go into more detailed in a build video for this build because there's actually a surprising amount of variation that you can have to this setup depending on your specific playstyle, while still being like mostly as effective as the optimal setup. Triton Vice's PvE glaive melee damage bonus is up from 100 to 200%, which is cool, I guess. Gives glaives a bit more of an advantage when you're up close with enemies, but we also need to make note of how glaives have been updated for Edge of Fate. Glaive melees now count as unpowered regular melee attacks. So this means Synthos, Knockout, Offensive Bulwark, Combo Blow, Spark of Feedback, blah, 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 blah. All those things affect glaives now. Now, the trade-off here for glaives getting access to these perks is that they get a baseline damage nerf, right? Minus 40% versus minors and majors, minus 28.5% against champions mini-bosses, minus 50% against bosses and vehicles. Testing things out in the firing range without using Triton Vice, our glaive is hitting 227 base on minors, 189 on a barrier champion. With Triton, we went up to 681 against minors, 567 against champions, with the combo making it out to 1,013. Switching it up to a boss enemy, we're dealing 114 and 203 at the combo end without Triton, and 334, 608 with. For fun, we also threw on a Synthesep class item, and against the minor targets, we were doing 602 damage on a single hit, 501 to champs, and 895 being the final combo hit. So, okay, there's a lot of numbers thrown at you. With that being said, does this put Triton Vice in a position where it is an option? Yeah, kinda. I'm not too sure it puts glaives into the omega top tier of stuff in the game, especially if you don't know what you're doing with a glaive, and especially because I've heard little to nothing about glaives this season from like anybody. But now that they have access to some of these perks and traits and exotics and all that, the playfield has opened up a bit more to experiment. Again though, I haven't really messed with glaives too much this season, and I haven't really heard about them too much this season either. Oathkeepers have had their damage bonus increased at the top end from 150 to 200%. The damage curve for it has also been shifted to give more of the damage bonus earlier in the bow's overdraw. And, you know, at the surface, this doesn't really sound very impressive, and that's because it's not. But, you know, with the changes that have been done to, like, Hierarchy of Needs, which we covered in a previous video, if you want to go watch that, I guess there's like some slightly higher potential here to do some damage, I guess. But considering that this is such a strictly bow exotic, so it's like the bow exotic, that damage boost is probably not going to do much to get people to throw on Oathkeepers. PvP Hunters Dragon's Shadow got some bonuses added to it. It now provides higher stability and ready speed for weapons. Activating Wraith Metal Mail increases stability and handling, and it reloads equipped weapons. Sprint, slide, and ADS strafe speeds got increased, and it also increases your class ability stat. Looking at Trials Report, seems like Stompies and the exotic class item are dominating the exotic charts for hunters, but there's still a decent chunk of people using Dragon's Shadow, so this change must have done something to help either boost its strength or keep it in the meta somewhere. Not that it's ever been, you know, terrible or anything like that. I'm not going to pretend that I've played any amount of PvP on my hunter in this season, so I'm going to let people sound off in the comments, but usually something like Trials Report is a decent indicator of something's popularity. Next, we're going to take a look at some of the reworks or other adjustments made to some other exotics. Speedloader Slack's Tight Fit perk has been adjusted. Now, dodging will reload all weapons and grants increased handling and reload speed for you and nearby allies, and can stack up to 5 times. On top of that, dealing sustained damage will grant chunks of class ability energy, which can hopefully be your engine to, you know, keep dodging and keep the stacks rolling. So, where can these be beneficial? I'd say best use case for them is when you have to dump a lot of damage out in a small window of time, rockets, GLs. That being said, with how many other things are available out there right now, I'm not sure how many people are going to be throwing these on over an exotic class item or some sort of a DPS exotic in something like the raid, unless some kind of tech is discovered, which maybe it's out there, but maybe it's not. Mask of Bakris has been given a pretty decent update, and when tied together with the Graviton Spike hand cannon that just released with Edge of Fate, it makes for a pretty fun and very active playstyle for hunters. Bakris has had its surge bonuses dropped in exchange for a stacking 10% damage buff to arc and stasis weapons, and Lord of Wolves. Kills while in Light Shift grant a portion of class energy, and Light Shift stacks up to 3 times. Bakris is also now usable with Arc Supers and subclasses. So, at first, you might be saying, you know, that feels kind of specific, but with a setup that doesn't really take a whole lot of investment to get online, you can start shifting some circles around some enemies while dealing pretty sizable chunks of damage. Pair this with at least 70 class stat, and you should be getting your class ability back within seconds of using it after getting a couple of quick kills. You're also taking advantage of both the arc and stasis benefits while charging Graviton Spike, and so the damage increase for this combination can build pretty quickly. Does Lord of Wolves fit into this somewhere? I guess so. You know, maybe in an environment where you can sustain the amount of special ammo that Lord of Wolves can chew through during a damage phase. All that being said, the rework feels pretty good. It's a nice boost to bring it into this era of the game. I would love to go over this exotic in a build video at some point soon. Next, we have the infamous Blight Ranger, getting a lot of tweaks here. Fixed an issue where cancellation damage was not scaling based on Voltaic Mirror progress. Voltaic Mirror now takes 25% less reflections to reach maximum. Less reflections, fewer reflections, whatever. And blocked melee attacks count as reflections. Maximum damage is up 50% on top of the scaling fixed above. Minimum cancellation damage increased by 150%, and it now always applies blind before dealing damage, and the animations and audio for it have also been changed to better show off the impact. I realize a lot of that is going to be completely meaningless to a lot of people because everyone just knows this as the arc staff blocking exotic that didn't do anything. Yeah, I don't know. As always, Blight Ranger's problem has been about its use cases, right? There's just not many times where you're wanting to invest everything that you have in your build into Blight Ranger blocking arc staff reflection setups. I'm sure some of you have seen clips of hunters reflecting Koragos' beam attack at it from the raid, and like, that's funny. It's not really worth the investment. I would love to actually revisit this exotic and see what kind of build we could come up with to see how effective we can make it, though. Might be a tough ask, but I'm interested. Last up, Khepri's Sting. Yeah, Khepri's Sting. When was the last time you heard about that one? Has had the True Sight and Smoke Punch perks removed, and instead, Touch of Venom now works like so. Defeating a weakened target releases a burst of weakening smoke and refunds Smoke Bomb energy. This refund will scale with your melee stat, and when it says weakened target, it means any weakened target from any weakened source. Khepri's now has a kind of pseudo-necrotic grip situation going on where it's funneling into itself with more of the spread of weakness that it can cause in large groups of enemies. In a fire team environment, this is the kind of setup that you would want to have where you're the first one to combat every single time so that you can suppress and then mark enemies, and then you start this chain reaction of smoking and marking and weakening targets while your team gets buffed up and has an easier time defeating everything from all the weakening that you're leaving around. That being said, I do feel like this might shine a bit more in a solo environment where you're the one completely in control of what's getting tagged, what's getting killed, your ability to reposition, etc., etc. You mix that in with something like Buried Bloodline or Shadow's Fang, depending on your playstyle, and the power fantasy is just weaving in and out of invis, marking and suppressing and weakening everything in an area to have complete control. So, Hunters, that's your update. That's it. I know a lot of focus right now is on this insane grapple melee setup that Hunters got going on right now, but there's plenty of other things to toy around with if you're ever getting bored of the same old, same old. Let me know if there's anything that you've really been enjoying specifically in the comments, any of these buffs, any builds that you've been working with that aren't maybe grapple melee. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.